Showtime! The Capital G Show starts right now.
What's up YouTube, Capital G here. So guys, today I thought of a pretty interesting topic, and I'm going to apologize in advance that I'm going to break this up into two different videos because I'm not sure how long I'm going to end up spending on some of these decks. But what I want to talk about is 5 different decks that I think can be very competitive this format now that secretly nobody's playing Effect Veiler. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but Max C has pretty much cemented itself as the de facto hand trap that we are commonly running. That probably has to do with the fact that Mermill is what most people would consider the best deck right now, and Veiler isn't that effective. But anyways, these are all decks that, you know, I think were drastically hurt by Effect Veiler, and now that the card's not seeing any play, I feel like these decks can actually flourish. Okay, so this is also in no specific order, so, you know, if I talk about your deck third instead of like first, don't get all butthurt or anything like that. So first deck I'm going to talk about is the 10 Goldfish Gadgets. I've actually played against this deck, and it's a lot better than I initially thought. First off, the deck has hand advantage for days. You know, when you're making your rank 4 XC plays with this deck, you're never really going to be losing advantage because your gadgets are always going to be paying for themselves. You can get a card like GIGANT X that's going to search for even more cards. And it's one of those decks that it puts offensive pressure on your opponent with, you know, GIGANT being a 2300 beater, but you expand basically no resources. You know, I feel like the fact that, you know, the deck is limited to, for the most part, only rank 4 XC plays, but you've got a wide variety. You know, Konami has released so many of them that you've got pretty much a piece for every single situation. You know, I love the fact that you can have a 2200 Abyss Dweller as long as you use the Goldfish. And one of the problems that gadgets were notoriously known for having in the past were, you know, the deck could often have tons of gadgets in its hand and no real way to make any advantage or make any use of them, you know, but throwing in a couple of TRAGOEDIAs pretty much solves that problem. Not only do those extra gadgets in your hand that aren't particularly useful, you know, boost Track's attack, but I mean, you can use those for, you know, multiple snatch steals against your opponent. You can use those for fortress drops. I feel like this deck takes advantage of Pot of Avarice especially well, and I feel like a lot of these plays are just, they're very high reward but relatively low risk. Like I said, when you're trying to put offense on the board with this deck, you're expanding what, a Goldfish and a Gadget. The Gadget instantly replaces itself. You know, the GIGANT X instantly replaces itself when it hits the board. I mean, who really cares if you attack into a deep prison? And for my money, you know, I do understand that, you know, a lot of people are playing Mirror Force this format, you know, Deep Prison bottomless, but Machina Fortress is still a bitch to deal with, especially if you have it backed with Forbidden Lance, which is a very common card for 10 Goldfish Gadget players to play. You know, if you try and snatch steal it with Big Eye, I get to see your hand. If you kill it, you know, via battle, I'm blowing up a card, and you just don't want to target it because you don't want to give that information to your opponent. So, you know, the fact is, you know, this used to be a deck where if you had a Gadget Veiler in the early game, maybe that was your only guy, and you got, you know, your monster ran over, and it's like, oh wow, I don't really have anything. But I feel like the deck is really stable right now with no one really running Veiler. Second deck I'm going to talk about is Constellars. Okay, so I really like Constellars. First off, they're much like the Gadget deck that I was just talking about. They can drop the Xyz every single turn. You know, the deck has a wide variety though. They're not just restricted to level 4, even though the majority of the best Constellars are level 4. I mean, they've got a rank 4, they've got rank 5s, they've got a rank 6 that you can make with rank 4s, they've got a rank 3, and I mean, let's be real, like, I've looked over all the Constellar Xyz. I mean, I think that they have collectively the best Xyz for an archetype in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Pretty much outside of Evil Swarm. I think that those two are pretty even. But, I mean, they just have Xyz for days. They've got an Xyz with a built-in Forbidden Lance. They've got one with a built-in evac, except it's not just it's not just using evac on monsters. I mean, that guy can bounce anything. So if your opponent tries to, you know, play defense against you, just setting like one card, he can bounce that. You can combo that with like Call of the Haunted and Fiendish Chain so that you can make advantage even when your opponent isn't committing cards to the board. I mean, that card is fucking real. Like, this deck, all their exceeds are also really practical. I mean, they've got an exceed that gives you 1,000 attack as long as the Constellar is attack. They've got you know, a rank 3 that doesn't have a lot of attack, except he puts all your opponent's monsters in defense. So obviously it's going to be relatively difficult for them to run them over. It's like, you know, with Constellars, they thought of, you know, how can we make these cards extremely practical? And that's why I like them. Like, they have 5 exceeds and none of them are bad. Every single one of them are extremely practical. You know, the deck is also, it's much like Gladiator Beast, where it's not reliant on any specific card or any specific monster to win. I mean, you can pretty much have a rainbow hand and you can make something out of it, because you don't need a 10 key, or you don't need a wind up factory, or, you know, a Genix Undying. You're not relying on any one monster or any one card to really get your deck facilitated and going. So I think that Constellars are pretty legit, and, you know, all the monsters pretty much summon other monsters during that same turn. So if you veiled one of them, that deck was in serious trouble. And then the last deck that I'm going to talk about in this video is the Infernity deck. The XC version specifically. First off, it's the best top decking deck that has ever existed in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! You know, I used to say that about Gladiator Beast, but let's be real. I mean, you can top deck an Archfiend, and that can turn into like 5 cards. I mean, look, we won't even go into top decking a Mirage or something like that. You know, you have the best themed counter trap in the entire game, even better than Gladiator Beast War Chariot. I mean, Infernity Barrier is just, that card is just the nuts. And, I mean, the new version to me seems like an XC version of Karakuri. It's like, either you OTK your opponent, or, you know, you make this basically uncrackable board. I mean, where Karakuri can put, you know, multiple Berets, Beredo, and a Stardust, or a Nat Beast, or, you know, a Landois or something. With this this XC version of Infernities, I mean, you've got like multiple Laval chains, you've got an 1800 beater and Archfiend, sometimes multiples of this guy, and then you have like multiple barriers that stops anything, and you've got, you know, breaks in case your opponent just wants to like summon one monster, knowing that, oh, well, you can't stop summons with barrier. Okay, well, I've got break that's chainable, that can stop attacks, that can pretty much do whatever it is I need it to do. I also feel like the new age version of Infernities running the XCs is just a little more consistent than the older versions. A lot of times with the old Infernities, it was pretty much like you either just raffle stomped your opponent or you rage quitted, and there was like no in between. You know, now if you open with, you know, one too many monsters, instead of having to like cheat and set monsters in your back row, you know, you can play the Monk, you can get Dark Grapher, you can get those cards out of your hand. You've got cards like a 1-for-1, obviously, and if you're caught, you know, with the like one Archfiend or the one Mirage in your hand, you can easily just make LAVALVAL chain, you know, dump these Street Patrol straight from your deck, which you couldn't do before, and then just proceed to go off on your opponent. So I feel like this deck is incredibly fast, has absolutely no problems with Ophion, and I mean, you gotta respect any deck that can OTK, but when it doesn't OTK, it can make just incredibly hard to crack boards, to where it's like, oh, if your opponent has any dead cards, I mean, they're just SOL and they're gonna lose. So anyways, thank you guys for watching part 1 of this episode, and look out for part 2. Subscribing makes life happy.